Specflow tutorial part 10 scenario context. In part 9 we have learned about a feature context. So in this session we are going to learn about what is scenario context and the utilization of the scenario context. So let me start this session. So when we guys are talking about a scenario context helps to get the information of the scenario. So whatever the information you want to get it related to a scenario, we can use a scenario context. Scenario context is an example of a context injection. So let me flip to Visual Studio to understand with an example. We have a Specflow session project, and this Specflow session project we have created in the previous sessions. In this we have a NuGet package related to a Specflow unit, as well as a feature files related to an event registration, and in this event registration feature file is having two scenarios, and all these steps have a corresponding step definitions in this event and this user information class. So let's go inside this, right click, go to definition, and we can see we have all the step definitions related to the steps which we have mentioned it here in this event registration feature file. So when we guys are talking about the scenario context is a class provided by the Specflow to us, and with the help of the scenario context we can access or we can get the information related to different scenarios. Those are present in the feature files. Right now, take an example of we want to get the title of this scenario, then we can use a scenario context. As well as we want to get the information related to different tags, we can also mention a tags like we have mentioned it here for the feature files. We can also mention the tags at the scenario level as well. So with the help of the scenario context class, we can get the information related to a scenarios. Another important point related to a scenario context, Specflow supports a context injection for the scenario context. It means if we add a scenario context here in the constructor of this event class, we will able to get the object like we are getting it here for the user class as well. So let's do one thing. Let's have the scenario context here, scenario context, and this scenario context is present inside a tech talk Specflow. Let's provide a name here SC, and then let's do one thing. Let's declare at the class level as well scenario context and then SC. Now assign this scenario context which we are getting it as a parameter to the class level reference variable of the scenario context. SC is equal to SC. We have added a scenario context as a parameter to the event class constructor, and this event class constructor is a Specflow class. The reason is we have added a binding keyword, and there is a Specflow keyword because whenever the Specflow engine sees a binding keyword on the top of the class name, then that class will be considered as a Specflow class. And with the help of the dependency injection, we can get the object of this scenario context in the constructor of the class, and then we can use this particular scenario context to get the information. Take an example of if we want to get the information, then if we see here, let's have this console.writeLine and say sc dot, and we can see we have a different methods and properties, and with the help of these methods and properties we can get the information related to a scenario. We have a one property that we call it as a scenario info property, and with the help of this scenario info property we have a different methods, and we can use different methods to get the information related to a scenario. So right now arguments, description, scenario, and a feature tags, and there is a tags, and there is a title. If we want to get the information related to title, then we need to use this title as a property. And if we have a debug point here, and if we go and run this particular scenario, let's go to the test explorer, right click and say debug, and we can see the control has reached it here. And if you hover a mouse on this SC, we can see we are getting the object of this scenario context. With the help of the context injection, we are getting the object of the scenario context class, and if we click on continue, we can see the control has reached it here. I am on the register page, and we are using the object of the scenario context here to get the information related to a title of the scenario. And if you hover a mouse here, we can see we are getting the title of that particular scenario, register event with valid information. With the help of the context injection, we can also get the object of the scenario context whenever we add a scenario context in the constructor of the class, as well as you have to have a one rule. You have to mark that class with a tag, we call it as a binding tag. Then you're able to get the object of the class which you have mentioned it as a parameter in the constructor of the class. and then you can use the object to get the information related to a scenarios. So if you talk about a scenario context can be accessed during the scenario execution. The way we are getting the object of the scenario context with the context injection, we can also achieve the context injection in the before scenario, after scenario, before step and the after step. And if we commit here, let's close this. If we go to a Specflow hooks, we have a Specflow hooks class, and this Specflow hooks is having a different hooks related to a before scenario and the after scenario as well. So let's have a scenario context here, and we can have the scenario context and SC. And if we use this to have the information related to console.writeLine, we can have it, and then SC dot and have a scenario info dot, and we can use again a title here. Okay, let's have a debug point here, and let's go here, right click and a debug, and we can see the control has reached it here. This is having an object of the scenario context. Let's have our mouse. We can see we are getting the object of this scenario context. So with the help of the context injection, and that context injection is also going to support in the before scenarios. So Specflow provides the context injection facility for the scenario context in a before scenario, after scenario, and these steps as well. And if we hover mouse on the title, we can see we are getting the information related to a title as well, register event with the valid information. Specflow supports a context injection for the scenario context in the scenarios as well as the steps hooks. Scenario context help you to store the values in a dictionary between the steps. This is another important part related to a scenarios. Take an example of right now. Let's close this. Take an example of here, we have a scenario, and this scenario is having a different steps. So with the help of the scenario context, if you are saving a value in this particular step, then that value can be used in another step in the remaining steps as well of that particular scenario. Let's do one thing. Let's save a value here, and then you try to access that particular value here in this when I select a register. So right click on this, go to definitions, and we have already a scenario context which we are getting it with the help of the context injection, and we have saved that particular object with the reference variable of the class level. Okay, so let's add a value here. We can say SC and a square brackets, and we can see we need to provide a key as a string. Here we can see we need to pass a key, and with the help of this key we can save the information. This is similar to a feature context, but in the feature context we can save the values, and that value will be accessible in all the scenarios. But if you talk about a scenario context value, that value will be available only within the scenarios, within the steps of that particular scenarios. Here we need to provide the key. Let's provide a key here. Name is equal to, can say, easy automation testing.com. So we have saved a value which is easyautomationtesting.com with a key, we call it as a name, in the scenario context, and we want to access this particular value which we have saved it here with the key, then we can access it in the remaining scenarios of this particular scenario. So let's try to access it here. Then I should get a confirmation message. Go to definition, and let's have this here. We can say console.writeLine, and we can use the object of the scenario context, and whenever you want to get the values, then you need to pass a key. You need to pass the key, and the value we have saved it, this easyautomationtesting.com, with the key we call it as a name. So let's use this name, and we can access the value which we have saved it with the name as a key. So let's have one in a debug point. Let's put it in a debug point, and we can, let's go ahead and test explorer, right click and a debug. Okay, the control has reached it here. Now click on continue, and the control has reached it here. We can see we are saving the value with this name, and then if we click on continue, and if we hover a mouse here, we can see we are getting the key as well as the value which we have saved it here. So with the help of the scenario context, we can save the value, and that value is going to be accessible within scenario among the steps, those we have declared it or those we are going to declare it within the scenario. Scenario info class helps to get the information related to a scenario. And if we talk about a scenario context dot error, scenario context dot test error is a property which provides the information about the error of the scenario. Many times it happens when we are executing our test cases, our scenario is getting it failed, or you can can say our tests are getting it failed. To have the information about whether the scenario is getting it failed or not, we use a test error property. So let's go it here. If you talk about a test error property, okay, let's go to Specflow hooks.cs file, and we have the after scenario. So whenever any scenario is getting it failed, we can access that particular test error property here in this after scenario. We can also access that property wherever we have the scenario context, but it does not make any sense till before scenario no step is getting it executed. That is the reason behind it. It makes sense to have the test error property check here in this after scenario. Have the scenario context. So here we can also use the SC to have the information. What we guys can use is console.writeLine and use this SC dot, and here is a test error. Test error is a property which helps us to get the error information which happens or which comes up in the steps. Let's do one thing. To get the error value here in this test error, we need to throw a error purposely. So let's go it here in this event registration. Let's throw error here in this go to definitions, and let's throw an error. So whenever you want to throw an error, we need to use a throw keyword. Let's use a throw new, and we are going to have a exception information. Provide the information here. If we go and run this in a debug mode, let's have a debug, and we can see we are getting the error because we are purposely throwing an error. And if we click on continue, the control will go to here in the Specflow hooks after scenario. So let's click on continue, and one more time we need to click on continue, and we can see the control has reached it here. If we hover a mouse, we are getting the test error information. If there is no error, then this test error property is going to show the value as a null. So let's do one thing. Let's close this and remove event registration. Don't throw in any error, and right click debug. Role has reached it here. Let's remove all the debug points here and then click on continue. We can see a control has reached it here, and if you hover a mouse with respect to the test error, we are getting the value as a null. We use this test error property to mark a scenario pass or a fail. With the help of the test error property, we can check if it is not equal to null. It means there is an error. Then we can take a screenshot and add it into our report as well. If it is null, it means there is no error, and we can go ahead and we don't need to take a screenshot. Test error property provides the information about the error of the scenario. We use the test error property to get the information whether the scenario is having error or not, and based upon the test error property, we can have the screenshots in the reports as well for the failed test or for the failed scenarios. If you talk about the additional resources, I have already created one course that is on the Udemy, and that course help you to learn a professional automation framework creation with the C#, Specflow and the Selenium. So that course is going to help us to create an enterprise level automation framework with the different design patterns, builder design pattern, singleton design pattern, a strategy design pattern, and dependency injection design pattern. So this is the one of the most important design pattern where we guys are not creating the object with the help of the new operator. So this dependency injection design pattern helping us to create the object without utilizing a new operator. Another is a IOC design pattern. So these all design patterns helping a automation framework which we have created in this Udemy course, making a more robust and a more reliable as well. So this course help us to build the thought pattern for designing and targeting the framework, and this course also help us to build the capabilities to understand any complex code base. So after completing the course, you will able to create your own professional level automation framework. After completing this course, you will able to create your own professional level automation framework from the scratch, not with this language but with the other languages as well, because a framework development is not dependent on any of the language. So framework code also uploaded with the course. If you want, you can enroll that particular course on the Udemy. Please subscribe this channel to have the notifications of a new automation related sessions.